Hi, I am James Kotecki. You are in the C-Space studio at CES 2023, and with us, Andrea Zapata of Warner Brothers Discovery. You are the Executive Vice President, I'm going to read this, Executive Vice President, Head of Ad Sales Research at Warner Brothers Discovery. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here, and that is a mouthful. Job well done.
Well, how do you define your title and your role as you just think about it colloquially to someone that you might meet here at CES?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely in the advertising space, have the great privilege of working with Warner Brothers Discovery. So we have 28 linear networks. We are in the streaming environment. We have a lot of digital. We cover everything from food to HGTV to sports to news. We've got it, right? My job in the ad sales world is to make sure that we are effectively measuring it. We're counting the audiences and the engaging fans that we reach, and then ultimately there's value for our really beloved advertisers and clients. Is that
Yes.
too easy or too weedy?
Well, of course the clients are beloved. And tell me some of the ways that you are measuring it right now, some of the trends that you are seeing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a broad question, obviously, but anything stand out to you at the beginning of 2023 that you're really thinking about?
Yeah, so we're actually going back to some of the basics right now as an industry when it comes to measurement and counting. And when I say measurement and counting, it's a reach frequency play of how many, how often, how long from an impression count. And we've had one sole provider who's done all of the counting since the beginning of time. The incumbent is actually still quite alive and well, but we've had innovation, technology, we've had bigger data sets, be it set-top box and ACR, which captures viewing at a large scale that allows us then to attribute it back to not just a person 25 to 54, but to an actual audience set. And so I say all of this because we are going to be changing the game in 23 when it comes to currency, not just at Warner Brothers Discovery, but the industry. We'll be doing this in partnership with not only Comscore, Video, iSpot, and of course Nielsen One, but also with our agencies and our clients, right? And so this year will be the year that we're not just going to have alternative measurement reads, but we're actually going to do currency and transaction, which is a big deal. But ultimately what we really want to get to, and this is sort of the beginning of your question, is how do we think about measuring not just top of the funnel brand awareness, but really start getting into site visitation, and then down to conversion, which is actually the holy grail. And when we have linear and digital, addressable, data-driven, actual data that can inform with first party in our streaming environment, we can do a mix of media that gets to not just top, but all the way down to the bottom of that funnel. So it's not easy, and not every client's leaned in, but we're headed in a direction where we're educating.
Advertising is hard. You're not the first person to say that today at the C-Space studio. It's absolutely true.
It's super fun, though.
Yes. How are advertisers, if you could kind of take their temperature feeling about all this, when you say what you just told me, do they have some initial skepticism, like, yeah, we've heard it all before, we've been trying to figure this out for decades, and we think we're going to have another year of still trying to figure it out? Where are they?
So funny, I was just having a conversation with an agency only about 10 minutes ago where there was a lot of concern. It's not necessarily, should we do this or why are we doing this? It's, wow, this is going to be really hard to do. Why? Because it's one thing to say that we want to aspire to better measurement. And when I say better measurement, counting not just a linear view, but also a digital view, deduping across. Like, it sounds very simple, but it's very complicated. We can do that now with these bigger data sets and these more innovative partners. It's the, how do we get into our systems the ability to forecast all the way to post, which sounds like everything from how do you find an audience, then actually said you delivered it. That is the hard part. And so going from one data set to now potentially 4, does it mean we need more people? Does it mean we actually need to have more innovation in our stewardship systems? Yes to all of that, and it's a learning curve. So there's a little bit of fear, but also a lot of excitement, and we're doing it together. No one's doing this in a silo or in a vacuum.
And as you do all this, are new truths emerging or new understandings of the world that kind of change your perspective and maybe even make you look retroactively and think, oh, actually, we were actually wrong about some things in the past, and going forward, we're going to have a different perspective on it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that. I think that we're constantly going to learn with these new data sets. One of the things that I think is really important to note is when you have something like 28 networks, right? In the linear environment. And then you have some of that content now moving and evolving to fast or streaming environments, right, where it's more on demand. You inherently think, oh, are we reaching a new audience, right? Are we actually extending? Is it cannibalization going on? Like, what's happening here? What we're learning is that it's unduplicated, it's incremental reach. There's different ad experiences that can happen in different environments, and ultimately we can see, here's a great example. On HLN right now, we have been doing marathons of the West Wing. The West Wing happened in like the 1990s,
Yes.
okay? Great. You're like, I'm thinking about it right now, I'll Google it later. So here's the deal. When we started doing that, what you realize is that people were tuning into it and they were watching the shows that were being programmed for that moment. But then they went to HBO Max, where all of the library and all of the catalog exists, and they started binging it there on their own time, right? Now, what we looked at is that actually had its own unique audience. This had its own unique audience, but there was also those who discovered and then watched the rest of it within the streaming environment, which is the way I think that God intended, right? I mean,
Yes.
if you can binge, you should binge. But the
Who's
West
God in this case? Aaron Sorkin, I guess?
Yeah, there you go. Which is, honestly, as soon as you say that, I'm like, some of the best dialogue in that show ever.
When you think about the screens that these things are appearing on, we're obviously at CES, which is in many ways a show of screens, new devices, new ways of watching all of this stuff. Does that play into the way that you think about advertisers reaching audiences? Do screens matter? And if so, are there new kinds of screens or new ways of engaging with this content coming over the horizon that you're starting to think about?
So some of the things that we've been thinking about specific to streaming. So right now we have HBO Max and we have Discovery Plus. In 23, we're going to be combining and creating a new streaming service. That's going to be, I think, unrivaled.
And it's called Max, right?
Right now it's called HBO Max.
Okay.
And we have an ad-free and also an ad-supported.
Yeah.
And so when we think about what is the opportunity in that space, right? The ad formats can be very different than what it has been in, say, a traditional linear environment. In the traditional linear environment, you're going to get maybe 5, 7 ads per pod.
Yep.
In a streaming environment, you can actually have a more interesting, maybe a less ad load, right? You can be much more targeted to the actual viewer. And we did something recently when we had the premiere of The Sex Lives of College Girls. We had Google who came in. They were a sponsor. And instead of just doing a brought to you by Google, we actually had characters in the show. We had outfits who could actually prior said, if you want to buy my outfit or try my lipstick, Google has lenses, they actually have retail, they have the ability for you to engage in a different way. And so when we did that, not only were we reaching a target audience, so we knew that 25% of all women 18 to 24 watched The Sex Lives of College Girls in the first 2 weeks of its launch, but we also knew that there was unaided awareness that went up to 74%, which was like 10 times the norm. And we also know that there was traffic engagement going on site. So there's a different way that you can play across the spectrum of inventory and impressions and audience that we bring to the table, but it's going to be different in linear than it might be in streaming, but they complement each other.
And does that change the way that you, on the advertising side, engage with the creators of these shows? To say you have this new toolkit to integrate. I mean, obviously having a branded truck or a brand of soda in a show is not necessarily new, but this level of integration that's enabled by streaming and digitalization, I think sounds like what you're saying. And so are there new tools now for show creators to kind of play with, and do you go to them with that?
Yeah, we do. So we have an entire arm that creates this custom content that has obviously great relationships with our content creators and with our storytellers. And we believe that this is really the unique advantage of our IP. It's what we bring to the table that is a differentiator. Not everybody is bringing episodic, I say the storytelling that not only speaks to the heart and soul, but also brings great fashion or brings drama, or really confusing. We were talking about Westworld earlier, right? I mean, so it's one of those things where we have the privilege of working with story creators, and we get to bring our advertisers along with that. So whether you want to be in a really cool sponsorship interstitial like that, or whether you want to get hyper-targeted using first-party data, utilizing a clean room, we can do it all, right? And I think that's sort of the change that's happening in television, because the consumer, it's just television, right? No matter how they get it, it's just about getting that content that they want. It's on us to be able to bring that innovation to our clients.
Do you, as the head of research, have a role for you personally for intuition in what you're doing? Obviously, there's so much, everything is about data, everything has to be data-driven, it's increasingly data-driven. But do you have that intuition ever in what you're doing? Like, maybe I want to check this thing out over here, and does that play a role in your job?
Yeah, so I think that gut is always first and foremost, it goes back to, are you a fan of content and storytelling? Yes, I am,
Yeah.
right? And so
So that helps you get that intuition
I'm
core.
a lover of
Yeah.
television, full stop, always have been, right? And so when you think about what's going to resonate, what's going to work, but also looking at the data that allows us to say, okay, so listen, we know that a viewer is going to consume in a certain way, but can we back it up in a way that actually proves out our hypotheses? That actually helps validate and creates confidence in how we scale certain solutions, or how we bring new measurement to bear, or how we derive value. But I always joke, at the end of the day, like, this is one of the most fun businesses because, I mean, who really doesn't like to watch TV?
Exactly. One last question. Live sports, I know, is another thing that you're looking at and measuring. What are some of the latest numbers or ideas or trends around that?
Yeah, so live sports and actually live news, to be honest with you, are the things that really do keep the lights on for linear cable and linear television in general.
Yeah.
People still reach or watch sports in a live fashion. It's simultaneous reach that our advertisers want, and you'd be hard pressed to get that in any other way outside of television and through the power of sports. Last year, we actually worked with measurement partners to think outside the box around how you evaluate, say, the March Madness, right? The NCAA basketball tournament. And it was really interesting to say, yes, we reached lots of people, but was it effective, right? And how did we actually reach people not just in a live environment, but then how are we doing it across screen? And I'm really excited to see in 23, as sports starts moving to more digital platforms, right? But at the end of the day, people still like to huddle around the screen and watch in a live fashion.
Well, thank you for bringing your energy and enthusiasm to this screen and for our audience here at the C-Space studio. Andrea Zapata, Warner Brothers Discovery. Thank you so much for coming.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you so much for watching here at CES 2023. I'm James Kotecki. This is the C-Space studio. Keep it right here. More great conversations are on the way. We are back in the C-Space studio here at CES 2023. Thanks for joining me. My name is James Kotecki, and sitting next to me, a long-time stalwart guest of the C-Space studio, Duncan Crabtree Ireland, National Executive Director, SAG-AFTRA. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, James. It's great to be back with you, and great to be back at a full-fledged CES.
A thriving CES.
Yes.
Even though you've been here 4 or 5 times, let's do what we typically do and just reintroduce you and SAG-AFTRA to people who are just catching up for the first time.
Sure, well thanks. Well, again, my name is Duncan Crabtree Ireland. I'm the National Executive Director of SAG-AFTRA. SAG-AFTRA is the union that represents performers. Basically, the way we put it is everyone who works in front of a camera or behind a microphone, we represent them. So all of the people you see in film, television, recording artists, broadcast journalists, they're all part of SAG-AFTRA. We have about 160,000 members.
And every year we kind of talk about some of the latest tech trends that you're thinking about, that you're maybe potentially concerned about from a legal perspective and what it means for your members. What are some of the things that are top of mind for you as you're heading into CES 2023?
Well, I'd have to say AI is clearly at the top of everyone's list we've seen so many developments, even since the last full-fledged CES a couple of years ago. AI has has exploded. So I think we're really interested in seeing what implementations and uses of AI technology are on display here at CES, and also how they interact with various other technologies, various hardwares that we might see in our industry and others. But our whole purpose in being here, I think like everybody else, is we want to know what's next, and we want to be able to be prepared for it and ready for it, so that when it actually starts to take hold, we're not behind the curve.
I think it's been so interesting to watch, even over the last year with some of the movies and TV shows that I watched. Darth Vader's voice in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series was actually dubbed based on samples of James Earl Jones's voice. He didn't actually lend his voice. I mean, he authorized it, of course. I believe Val Kilmer in Top Gun, the latest Top Gun, they basically dubbed his own voice using an AI synthetic technology. So there's a lot of interesting, very viable, very cool use cases for this when it's all done legitimately. But what are some of the big concerns that you have when some of this stuff is done in a less than legitimate way?
Well, you hit on it exactly right. I mean, our main concern is consent and appropriate compensation. And so whether it's James Earl Jones doing a licensing deal, whether it's someone like Val Kilmer or others, where AI is actually being used to help leverage against disabilities, for example, people being able to continue working, those are really great uses with consent and with appropriate compensation. Outside of that, we obviously see the dark side of AI. The most obvious example, exactly. The most obvious example of that, of course, is the use of AI technology to create deepfake pornography. A lot of that uses images of our members, obviously without their authorization. And so that's why dealing with AI technology is a question of negotiations with reputable industry companies who are going to use it for good, and it's also a question of public policy. Things like the legislation we've gotten enacted in the state of New York and other places to combat deepfake pornography and other misappropriations of people's image and likeness through that.
And are you confident that, can you tell us a bit about that legislation, what it does, and are you confident that that is the right piece of legislation, or is it the kind of thing where it's like a first step, but you wish they were doing more?
Well, I mean, I think it's all part of a broader package trying to address this issue. No one solution solves the whole thing. And it is an important step because it does give people the right to do something. I mean, I think people feel very frustrated when their image or likeness is misused and there's nothing they can do about it. And so providing tools for us as a union and for our members and for other people just in society in general to protect themselves is important, but it doesn't solve the whole problem. So it really is a combination of collective bargaining with the companies who are using this legitimately, where parameters need to be put on it, and also public policy, and also education, and just making sure that people in the public know that's not something that's okay to abuse people in that way.
And you're a lawyer by background. Do you have to invent new legal philosophies or frameworks for understanding some of this stuff? I mean, obviously you want to push forward new laws, but do you have to have new ways of even thinking about some of this stuff because the legal frameworks you've had up to this point have not considered this kind of technology, for example, using people's likenesses in these kind of nefarious ways? You know,
there's been existing concepts like the right of publicity that's been around for many decades that apply to that, so that hasn't been so much the case there, but where you're right on is with AI, and I think particularly in the copyright area, there is a whole area we're going to have to work on, which is what does it really mean when an AI tool takes hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of inputs of other people's creativity and just mashes them together to create what is supposedly a new result, but it isn't really a new result. It's pieces of everybody else's work put together. That isn't really adequately addressed by existing copyright concepts, and we're going to have to take that on.
And it wouldn't be so obvious either, right? Because it's not as if there's one particular actor who's in a kind of a deep fake that we can just say, oh, that's not right. It would be something where maybe you'd be getting hints of a lot of different people, but combined together. I wonder though, philosophically, if you think about what creativity is, what is my mind doing when I'm being creative, what is your mind doing? We are in some ways mashing up all the inputs that we get into our minds and then putting it out into the world. But of course it was never conceived of legally on this kind of a scale or with this kind of a scope.
Right, and I mean, of course, those kind of disputes have existed since the inception of copyright. Is something derivative?
Right.
Is something just a copy of somebody else's work or not? And so we have a framework for dealing with that, but I think you're right. I mean, as humans, we take in a lot of inputs, but I think there's also a spark of creativity that's truly unique. I mean, there are truly unique ideas that people come up with that we've never seen before, and that's oftentimes the most exciting things we see are these new approaches, new ideas. And so it remains to be seen if AI can really do that. I don't think it can now. Will it be able to in the future? I think that's an open question.
We've been talking, as we said, for probably 5 or 6 years, you and I, on these topics. Do you feel like you and your organization are having to run even faster to catch up with how fast the technology is going? Are you getting out of breath, so to speak? What's the pace of it? Have you seen it accelerate?
Depends on the technology. AI, definitely yes. That technology is developing so rapidly, and I think in part because some of the companies who are doing the most on this kind of are doing it under very close wrap because they are concerned about regulation and other things that might happen if people knew fully what's going on. But then on the other hand, there's other technologies that looked like it was going to be that and really haven't panned out as well. I mean, NFTs would be a perfect example of that from my point of view. Not saying NFTs are going away, but 3 years ago at our last real full in-person CES, everyone was talking about NFTs and what impact they were going to have, and I think that's proved to be not as much as we thought, maybe.
Let's talk about another buzzword, metaverse. Do you, I'm just curious to take your pulse on, like, how often do you use that word? How often do you hear that word? And has the trend gone up or down?
More and more. I was here last year at this sort of smaller CES that happened last year, and everyone was talking about the metaverse. But one of the things I noticed was a lot of the companies that were talking about it didn't really seem to know exactly what they meant with the term that they were using. And I think we're in a process of sort of defining that. For us, we're very clear on our approach to the metaverse, and that it's not a truly new concept. It is an evolution of the sort of existing transition of things from the physical to digital world. We're very concerned about it. There's plenty of room in it for our members to work, I think, and so we're focused on it, but not to the exclusion of other things that are coming down the line as well.
Do you have any other predictions or thoughts about the future that might seem kind of crazy, but you think actually might happen?
Well, I actually think that we're going to find that there are a lot of uses of AI that are very beneficial for SAG-AFTRA members and for other people, and I think particularly in the area of helping people to be able to overcome limitations that might impact their work opportunities. I think particularly in terms of people being able to have more work opportunities and not be so limited by schedule and geographic location. So I guess what I would say is, I think a lot of people are very afraid of the future of AI, and we are all right to be cautious and concerned about it. But I think we can also see that there are some positives to it as well, and want to make sure we enhance those and make sure we take advantage of them.
Is there a potential concern about the haves and have-nots in the acting world? If I'm a very successful and famous actor and I want to do more work, now I can enable AI to, let's say, double my ability to work, or I can clone my voice and now I've got twice the number of commercials that I've booked or whatever, but does that leave other people out? Do you worry about that kind of disparity in the system?
I definitely worry about it. However, right now, the impact of technology like streaming platforms, for example, has actually dramatically increased the amount of job opportunities there are in the industry. It has had a side impact, which is reduced reuse of work, but the initial work opportunities have actually increased. And I think as we start talking about the audience of one, that's something that a lot of commentators and people talk about, there is the possibility that we're going to actually see continued growth in the creation of content that's more targeted.
Final thought, what do you think technology won't change in the next few years?
What will technology not change? Probably, I think one of the things we've learned over the pandemic is no amount of technology is going to change the desire that people have to interact and relate on an in-person level. I think that's why in this, probably one of the most technology-focused places in the world, you have hundreds of thousands of people coming here to be together in person and see things. So I think that in-person element is going to is going to continue no matter what technological developments we see over the next few years.
Well, we really appreciate you joining us right here in
Thank you.
person.
Likewise, it's great to be here.
Duncan Crabtree, Ireland, SAG-AFTRA, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, James.
And thank you so much for watching. This is CES 2023. You're in the C-Space studio. So many more great conversations are ahead, so don't go anywhere. I'm James Kotecki. Thanks for watching.